8 folders. 8 lives. 8 reputations polished into something we call hero. But today, we don't praise, we audit. Because every hero story hides 3 things: cost, contradiction, and craft the craft of being remembered. Let's open the files. For each case, we'll ask the same 4 questions. The act. What did they actually do? The cost. Who paid, and how much? The myth machine. Who shaped the story, and why? And the afterlife. What endured after the person was gone. This isn't a morality contest. It's historical anatomy. Case File 1. Ashoka, the Mauryan emperor. The act? He expands his empire, then publicly repents after the brutal conquest of In E-civics, he reports mass death and deportation, then pivots to rule through a moral language of governance. The cost. The victims of Kalinga are not abstract. The numbers in the edict are meant to hurt the reader. Now look at the price. The myth machine. The medium is the message. He carves state ethics onto rock and pillars across his empire. The afterlife. Ashoka is remembered less for conquest than for attempting to restrain power with moral policy. He's not a saint, he's an emperor trying to civilize the imperial self. Case File 2. Saladin, the act. He retakes Jerusalem in 1187, reshaping the political reality of the Crusades. The cost, war, siege, and displacement. Heroism here sits on the machinery of a state and its army. Now watch the story get manufactured. The myth machine. Reputation becomes strategy. His image of restraint and justice gains power precisely because it can be admired, even by his rivals. In one famous story, he dies with little personal wealth, a tale that functions like a moral signature. Now, what survives the person? The afterlife. He survives as a model of rulership, part history, part ideal. Sometimes a hero is also a message to your enemies. Here's the trick. Even names can be unstable. Ashoka's edicts sometimes use titles like Beloved of the Gods, forcing later historians to reconstruct his identity from fragments. Heroism often arrives after the person, assembled by archivists, priests, chroniclers, and states. The archive makes the idol. Case File 3. Joan of Arc. The act. A teenage visionary forces her way into the politics of the 100 Years' War, becoming a military and symbolic catalyst for the French cause. The cost, capture, betrayal, and death burned at the stake in 1431. Now look at the price. The myth machine. The trial record is a stage. Theology becomes politics. Legal procedure becomes a weapon. A young woman's voice, funneled through hostile questioning, becomes a text that later generations read as martyrdom. The afterlife. She becomes a national ikonand, a permanent argument about faith, authority, and gender. Her war ends. Her transcript begins. Case File 4. Simón Bolívar. The act. He leads independence campaigns across northern South America, becoming the emblematic liberator. The cost. Independence wars shred societies, and victory leaves ruins to govern. Now watch the story get manufactured. The myth machine. Revolutionary iconography does the heavy lifting. Portraits, proclamations, and later nationalist memory convert a leader into a continent-spanning symbol. The afterlife. Bolivar endures as an ideal of liberation, while his political contradictions remain the quiet footnote that keeps returning. Winning freedom is a moment. Building it is a century. Case File 5 and Toussaint Louverture. The act. He rises within the Haitian Revolution, navigating shifting French politics and foreign threats to stabilize a transformed society. The cost. The cost is to ball a brutal war and the economic trap of a global plantation system. Now look at the price. The myth machine. Later narratives want a clean liberation story. History offers something harder. Emancipation plus coercive labor policies intended to keep production and survival possible. The afterlife. Here's a hero of freedom whose story forces an adult question. What does it take to defend emancipation in a hostile global economy? A revolution doesn't abolish constraint, it changes its shape. Heroism moves at the speed of media. Ashoka used stone edicts. Slow, permanent, imperial. Tubman relied on human networks. Fast, fragile, secret. Gandhi mastered newspapers and cameras. Public, repeatable, contagious. Mandela's era ran on broadcast images. A face becoming a promise. Sometimes the decisive technology isn't the sword, it's the store delivery system. Heroes are also infrastructure. Case File 6, Harriet Tubman. The Act. She organizes escape and rescue through the Underground Railroad and later supports Union operations in the Civil War. The cost. Constant threat of capture and violence. And bodily endurance, shaped by a severe head injury and lifelong episodes of sudden sleep. These details make her story less mythical and more terrifyingly human. The myth machine. Popular culture loves the lone savior. The historical Tubman is also a planner, recruiter, and intelligence asset heroism as operations. The afterlife. A symbol of freedom that also teaches a practical truth. Liberation often depends on logistics. She was a hero with a map, not a crown. Case File 7, Mahatma Gandhi. The Act. He builds mass, non-violent resistance, turning moral discipline into political force. The Salt March makes a mundane commodity into a stage for sovereignty. The cost, repression, imprisonment, social fracture, and the moral pressure of holding a movement to standards it cannot always maintain. Now watch the story get manufactured. The myth machine. The iconography matters. The spinning wheel. The walking stick. The body is a symbol, but the politics behind the image is calculated and strategic. The afterlife. Nonviolent resistance becomes a global grammar of protest, often simplified, sometimes misunderstood, but still powerful. He weaponized restraint. Case File 8, Nelson Mandela. The Act. From militant resistance to negotiation, Mandela becomes central to South Africa's transition to democratic rule. The cost. Decades of imprisonment, but also the broader costs, borne by a society engineered for racial domination. The myth machine. The camera loves a reconciler. The smile, the shirt, the handshake. Yet the hero's story risks erasing the movement, the bargaining, and the institutional architecture that made it possible. Now, what survives the person? The afterlife. His most heroic act may be restraint, refusing to let victory harden into a new tyranny. The rarest power is power that refuses to become cruel. So what did the audit find? Some heroes are admired for changing the world, some for refusing to become the world's worst habits, and nearly all for embodying what their societies desperately wanted to believe. That power can be moral, that suffering can be transformed, that freedom can be organized, and that victory can be restrained. A hero is a person and a need. If you could add one more case file to our audit, who would it be? And what key question would your audit expose about them? Like, subscribe, and leave your candidate in the comments. I'll pick the most compelling one and run a full audit in a future video. Thanks for watching.